This video will cover the major change process in the Infraon Infinity suite. Before creating a major change, let's go through the workflow for this major change. Navigate to Infraon configuration. Within Infraon automation, the workflow module can be accessible. Search for the major workflow. Infraon Infinity provides default workflow for a major change. If necessary, users have the option to customize it or add a new workflow for major changes, as per the organization's needs. Every change starts with the Open New status. When the change is marked as Open New, the requester will receive an email notification. The configuration is set up so that the requester, team leader, and submitter will all receive an email stating that their change has been opened. The email includes details such as reported time, requester name, change manager, state status, due date, and summary, among other fields. The requester, team lead, and submitter will all receive this notification. These email notifications can also be customized. Once a change is created, the change manager may close the change immediately if it's deemed improper. However, if the change is appropriate and the reason for the change is valid, it can be moved to the evaluation state. After evaluation, it progresses to analysis. During this stage, the change manager can provide planning details, such as the rollout plan, rollback plan, and the plan end date. After these details are added, the change is submitted for CAB approval. Since this is a major change, hence it needs a CAB approval, so there are two options. Either seek approval from the approval team or CAB approval. Since this is a major change, let's opt for CAB approval. Users have to select the CAB team and enter the subject line. Infraon provides various macros that can help while entering the body. By typing two curly braces, users will have the option to use these macros. In the subject field, include the change ID. This display ID will correspond to the change ID, and with the change ID, users can note it's submitted for. Now, when an approval format is created, for example, Dear Team, the subject will be, the change ID is submitted for approval. Users need to include the change ID, change summary, change description, and the approval link. Once the details have been filled, save this format. Once it's marked as in approval status, an email notification is triggered to the member of the CAB approval team. If the team approves it, the requester can proceed to steps like build and deploy. Conversely, if the CAB rejects it, the process reverts to the planning stage. Necessary modifications have to be made before resubmitting for CAB approval. Upon CAB approval, the change implementer will implement the change by adding the required tasks. For instance, if there's a server infrastructure replacement, tasks like server procurement and setup will be added. After adding these tasks, implementation, build, and test phases follow. All necessary tasks must be performed to complete the change. When all tasks are completed, requesters have to update the change status to verification and release for deployment. After deployment, one can perform deployment verification and then close the change. These are the default steps provided according to ITIL VF4 standards best practices. However, if these steps do not seem necessary, users can configure them to fit the organizational requirements. After configuring the titles, click on Publish, and the workflow will be published. Now, let's create a major change to see how it will be mapped to this particular workflow. To do this, navigate to the Change module, click on New Change, and then add the change. Consider the change discussed in this workflow, such as server infrastructure replacement. First, provide the requester's name and the title of the change. Next, include a detailed description of the change and select the due date and time for when the change should be completed. Users will also need to set the priority to assess the risk and specify the change type. Since this is a major change, select Major Change. Additionally, include the Reason for Change, RFC. The approval team will review this to decide if the change is justified. For instance, the reason for the change could be that the existing servers are approaching their end of life. That's why organizations are procuring new servers and making a change. A change manager will be there overseeing this change entirely, from the planning to the closing stage. Next, select the change implementer, who will be responsible for executing approved changes in the IT environment according to predefined procedures and timelines. Now select Impacted Services. Once the required fields are added, proceed to submit as new. Following this addition, update the status of the ticket to evaluation, and subsequently, change the status to analysis. After analysis, a proper plan is necessary, laying out the rollout and rollback strategies. In Infraon Infinity Change Management System, it offers various modules and tabs, such as communication. Here, users can view all communications related to this particular change. In the Relations tab, users can link other modules like tickets, problems, changes, and requests that are associated with this change. Moving on to the Planning tab, users must specify the planned start and end dates and times, as well as the detailed rollout plan. This includes preparation, deployment, data migration, verification, and, importantly, the rollback plan in case of any disruption. After adding the plan details, save the changes. With the planning entered, update the status to Planning. Once planning is complete, submit it for the Change Advisory Board approval. Select the default CAB team to review the changes. Once the user has submitted the change for approval, the CAB members will receive an email. Upon their approval, the change will proceed to implementation. Here, one can see the email that has been configured in the workflow. The CAB member will receive an email with the subject and the content. If there are any modifications needed, this can be made in the Major Change workflow. The CAB member will then acknowledge the mail by clicking on the Take Action link. The CAB member can add their respective comments and can accept or reject the change accordingly. Once approved, the status of the change will be updated to implement each process directly. To implement this process, there will be different tasks involved. In the tab section, there is Task Management. The first task to implement this change, such as procuring a new server and setting up a build, required to add a task. Click on New Task. Then, add the title. Users can add a task named Server Procurement and Setup. Set the status to Do and select the priority, and select the assignee for this task. Add the due date and time of this particular task. Once the task is submitted, it will be assigned to the relevant user. Infraon also have a change schedule to consider. Here, one can view the changes and the tasks that need to be completed within a specific duration. Filter these tasks based on status, open, in progress, or new, as well as by type, priority, risk, and team. The assigned individual is then tasked with completion. When the task is finished by the assignee, the status will be updated to closed. The change implementer is also able to adjust the status of the change. Now move the change into the implementation phase. Similarly, requesters can add multiple tasks that are necessary for this particular change implementation. For the moment, let's add just one task and we'll close this change. Subsequently, proceed to the build and test phase. If there is an added task and then complete it, after that, one can mark its status, for instance, as verification for review purposes. Once it's verified, the release and deployment can occur. Post-deployment, the task status should be updated to reflect the deployment state. After deployment, modify the status to deployed. Following that, carry out the verification step. For this, a deployment verification status is assigned, which may involve different tasks during that stage. Requesters can add those tasks under the appropriate status. Once the task is completed, change the status of the particular change. After the deployment is verified, proceed to close the change completely. While closing, users need to add a closing note detailing what steps have followed. Select the user in the Close By and the closing type, and then click on Complete. By clicking on Complete, the status of the change will be updated to closed. Thus, as the change is closed, this is how a major change can be executed in the Infraon Infinity Suite.